Hello, it's John Robb here with Cathal Coughlan, who's just put out a really wonderful new solo album, the first album for 11 years.
First under my own name, yeah.
So why the delays? You just piling the material up, getting an opportunity to put it out, or just get distracted by life?
Mainly distracted by life, actually. And I got a bit discouraged by the last one, in terms of what you could and couldn't do with a record after streaming started to kick in. And I was kept busy enough musically with sort of live things, other people's projects for the most part. And that was quite satisfying. I did a whole lot of multi-artist things over those years. And I did the North Sea Scrolls album with Luke Haynes and Andrew Muller, which was great fun. But yeah, I started writing around 2016, seriously again. And yeah, gradually things kind of fell together then. And I've been really pleased with the way things have turned out.
I mean, what brought the writing back on again? Was it? Did you feel like there was something to say, or was it just started bubbling back up again, like a peat bog or a volcano?
Clarity sort of re-emerged. I'd wasted a lot of time on dead-end ideas, and really, it was only when I wrote I wrote 2 songs for a W.B. Yeats commemoration show in Dublin, and only one of them got used. And the other one was kind of going spare, and I had done something. Well, it's on the album actually. It's the Lobster's Dream, which is a sort of a bit of a piss take of some kind of Yeatsian apocalyptic millennialist kind of stuff. And I thought, well, yeah, I can take this kind of thing a bit further, So that was when things began to gel, really. And the thing, I was listening to things that kind of began to make a kind of sense to me, even though they came from like really different time spaces, things like Procol Harum, Henry Cow, Jim O'Rourke, Eiko Ishibashi, these somehow I began to be able to perceive something that I could, a space that I felt I could actually write in,
That's quite a big space. It's quite an eclectic selection. Was it kind of spirits that music was made in, or is there a line that kind of joins it together?
Well, I think taking sort of dissonant musical ideas that could sound, and sometimes, in the case of Henry Cow, do sound sometimes quite awkward. But the slap happy Henry Cow albums are a lot more focused and song orientated. And I don't know, something about taking ideas that are almost drawn from formal composition and making them into actual pop songs. And even, Motown, like the Four Tops, like the greatest Four Tops records like Bernadette and Walk Away Renee and things like that. I mean, those are quite, quite spirited sort of ideas. And the Frankie Valli stuff from Motown that was not released until years later. I mean, The Night comes from that period. That would be the only song from that time that was well known. I don't know. I mean, it just fires up the imagination. I mean, you don't quite know what you're going to do with it, and you hope you're not going to come up with something imitative. But the inspiration thing just gets weirder as you get older. Really, when you're young, you know who you're trying to emulate, and you think you know why, and you think you know where you're going to get, and it's the mistakes you make along the way that can make the work worth something, maybe if you're lucky. When you get older, it's somehow more sort of convoluted, and not that you're kind of world weary and think you've heard it all before, but you know your weak points, and they can seem to hem you in, and you can think, oh well, yeah, I like that kind of thing, but it doesn't really apply to me, and that sort of thing. But something as unrelated to what I could ever possibly do as Procol Harum, is in a way is kind of perfect, nothing but the truth and Conquistador and stuff like that, it's just great, really.
I'm always fascinated by the way you sort of you have one foot in the underground, but somehow you've always managed to make sense of it in a sort of almost commercial way. It's a brilliant trick if you can do it. It's difficult to make sense of almost the senseless in musical terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can't really do commercial, but in terms of the way I package things up, it's easier for me to think in a kind of a Tin Pan Alley way, even if the things that I'm putting through the blender are random and dissonant. I somehow don't often have the guts to keep something going for like 10 minutes. And instead it's like 3.5, and there's got to be another bit in the middle of it and that kind of thing. I mean, I try to bat it down, but I think we're all prisoners of what it is we think we can do, and there's no amount of confidence that really can, in the mind of a non-sociopath anyway, which I mean, I hope I'm a non-sociopath, that can kind of make you think, no, well, actually, no, I am going to do this thing for 15 minutes, and I don't give a stuff who likes it or not. But I mean, I listen to stuff like that all the time. I just don't think it necessarily applies to me.
It's, in a sense, it's a creative approach, which and I know you're a big fan of Scott Walker, but that thing as well, where Scott Walker, and he did very easy, made very commercial records, big selling records, but was far happier making records that sort of tipped on the other side of the equation. To that point, in his later days, making that amazing record with Sunn, a completely insane clash of ideas, but making sense of it in a way that's actually quite listenable. And is that an approach that you kind of you're interested in as well?
Well, I think there was something very particular that he was doing on those last 3 records, particularly, which were I think of them more as audiobooks in a funny sort of a way. I mean, I know there are, like on the Sunn one, there's a Brando. I mean, which could be on, if it had an orchestra, it could be on Scott 3, but but you're right. I mean, he had found a way. I mean, collectively they found a way that the Sunn wall basically could be this, for all intents and purposes, a symphonic thing. I'm not that much about the words, actually, and I think that's what was guiding him. I think the after Tilt, everything from there on, I think, was first and foremost about recorded things in the Faber book are really good, and you just think, well, what would those have been like as fully fledged songs, Yeah, the words come second for me most of the time.
Really?
So I think maybe that's the reason why I sort of Tin Pan Elliot. Yeah, the tune comes first.
Wow, because
Nearly always. I mean, I might have a title,
the title's always great, but the lyrical content is always amazing. It's very it's very image led. It's very pictorial, and it's full of twists and turns. And it's sort of telling the truth in a very poetic way. That's what I thought with your songs, the way you write.
Well, it's nice to hear that. But somehow I very rarely come up with anything that makes it into the final draft. I might have a stream of words, but they rarely suggest anything musical. I mean, you can usually tell where they won't go, but not so much where they will. And as for coming up with things in any kind of verse or blank verse or any syntax that kind of survives to the end, very rarely would I do that. I think it might be conditioning really from when I started with Sean O'Hagan. You know, there was the way around that we would always do it.
So you have the melody first, or you have them separate, and you bring the words to sort of shoehorn them into the melody.
Yeah, pretty much.
But they sound very comfortable in there, you know, like some bands do that, and you can actually hear the shoehorns, whatever that sounds like. But with yours, that the words sound like they should be there. You know, they seem to flow in a way that they just came out to, and they just fitted, you know, perfectly.
Yeah, well, I mean, I sometimes, as I'm making a tune, like the melody I think is going to be there, I'll have songs, you know, like what vowel goes on what note kind of thing. And that'll be my guide. Sometimes you can really just destroy a tune by putting the wrong vowel sound in the wrong place. Really, it is literally putting a foot wrong. I think Robert Wyatt said something once that, you know, I think he said that he would rather sing in a non-English language badly than change the sound of the note, you know, because it is part of the music. And I mean, it doesn't matter if it's, it doesn't even matter if it's a spoken vocal. If it's a particular kind of declamatory thing, even in that, I think you've got limited scope for changing sound before the whole thing just changes completely, and you have to rethink the whole syntax of it. You know, I would like to do a bit more talking.
Yeah, I mean the talk won't sound good, but if you actually got a good singing voice, you may as well use it. It's a rare gift to have, isn't it?
Yes and no. You know, I mean, I'm not that precious about it. It's taken me a lot of hassle and a lot of losing my voice on tour and other stuff like that to get to where I am vocally. But I think you have to be willing to turf it out when it's not the right tool for the job at any time. But it seems like everybody's talking on records all of a sudden. So I think I might be putting that wish aside for another couple of years.
So the album itself, it has it's a loose concept album, isn't it? There's like it's telling a story. It's got an overarching idea to it.
Well, just the kind of Coughlan rebrand, really. But it's just in a thicket of chaos, really. You know, just of rampant untruth and mutton dressed as lamb, dressed as a bale of silage. You know, it's just in the thicket. Yeah. There were a couple of songs I left off that were stranger. I was listening to them a while ago because I think I'm going to put them on an EP with some other things. But there are things that recur. Animals being forced to do things they don't want to do, like the dog having its lights punched out and the lobster crossing the desert. I've been a vegan for a good while, so you know it's something I kind of take for granted that you shouldn't be like that to animals. But again, it struck me as repetitive when I was doing it. But I thought, nah, sod it. I mean, it's an entirely reasonable thing to do. Sorry, I'm looking down because I'm just putting another bit of Wi-Fi in reserve in case this one taps out on us.
Well, you put 10p in the Wi-Fi meter.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, €10. Yeah.
So, I mean, does it matter if the concept's easily understood? You know, I know it's not a concept like a prog 1974 prog album, but the idea of it in a theatrical sense, I suppose, is it about identity and shape-shifting identities and? Is that what it is? I'm trying to get.
Yes.
I did read it up, but I didn't quite understand it basically because I was too stupid to work it out. So I'm asking you now.
Well, I mean, it is actually hard to pin down, but I think it's what identity, all manner of identities are up for grabs at the moment. I mean, some of these are in a good way. People are allowed to be more fluid in the way that they live their lives. That's, to me, as a liberal thinking person, that's nothing but good. But we have other people who have been fed a whole bunch of lies about who they are. Normally through some medium that they trust. And I mean, that used to be the Prime Minister or the Archbishop of Canterbury or the Pope or something, someone of that stature. Now it's more just this kind of diffuse media thing that we're in. It could be too much Netflix, or it could be too much Twitter, or it could be, Parler or whatever. And they're fed a bunch of lies, and they don't know what to do with this stuff. They don't know where they're coming from, where they're going. And they're inclined to lash out, And I think it applies to all of us. I mean, I've been known to lose my patience with people over, refusal to wear a mask while putting themselves in my presence, and stuff like that. I mean, everything has become about identity. Even the pandemic became about identity after the first couple of weeks. There is a consensus about some things. About other things to do with the pandemic, there simply isn't. And then there's the matter of my own identity as a kind of a stateless type of person, able to live in one country while retaining strong links with another, working in the other one quite a lot, and able to just nip back and forth whenever suits me. And around about 2016, when a certain referendum happened, this stuff began to look a lot more contended than it had done in the last 3 decades or more, So that's what put all of these things were really what put identity very high in my thinking, and it is a recurring theme through all the words that I've written on this record. And even the Coughlan thing is about a spurious identity constructed out of no ethnological basis. Just let's have a phonetic string and let that be the name,
So it was like, because there is no identity, it's and identity is fluid, why not create a whole new identity anyway? Because the identity the real identity you thought you had probably doesn't exist anyway. Is that kind of basically what it's saying?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of my state of mind anyway. I'm pretty free and easy about what makes its way into the songs. They wouldn't be songs if I knew exactly what they were about. Because I have gone the other way in the past. I've tried to kind of nail down, this one is about this and it does this, and you're supposed to think that when you hear it. So this time I was trying not to be so much like that if I could help it.
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, because I don't think music specifically has to have a meaning. It means completely different things to completely different people. And what's interesting here is, in this time when all identity is up for grabs, music's actually one of the few things left that seems to have some kind of identity, even though it's not got an identity. So there's like a lot of contradictions going on here, which makes it even more interesting.
Yeah, well, I think the kind of hard and fast tribal stuff in music has eroded a good bit over the years, and I think it's a good thing on the whole. I mean, it's been accompanied by other things, like the rise of, completely virtual music, and virtual livelihoods.
Yeah.
But I think, the fact that doesn't cost an arm and a leg to check something out, and there are numerous ways of doing it, numerous small outlets, people whose taste you learn to trust and check out what they tell you about all of that. I mean, it was, nothing could ever be as good or as beneficial as what John Peel gave a whole bunch of us in the 80s. Apologies to anybody who came along after that. But if we're not going to have that, we might as well have this multiplicity of, wide choice and knowledge,
So these kind of themes and these kind of situations, are these things that you were conscious of when you first started making music way back about 4 decades ago?
No, because I was just lashing out, and I had things that it was all just a bit more hard to pin down, For example, in like the Mark II version of The Fall, you knew there was something strange going on, something deeply, deeply strange that you hadn't heard in music before. Such as, for example, they played in Cork, and the version of Micro Disney that was going then was one of the support acts, and so we felt on cloud nine, having been asked to do that. And they did a version of New Puritan, which at that point only existed as just that acoustic guitar thing on the previous, I think it was on an EP. And Mark was reading something out of his hand, and there was something about The Shining. And it was just like the most strange thing. It wasn't psychedelic. It wasn't punk rock. It wasn't kind of anything you could really pin down. And I just thought, well, that's the kind of thing I would like to be able to do. And obviously, there was no point in trying to imitate that. None. But it was the pursuit of the unknown, really. That's what it was all about for me then. And it took us into some kind of rubbish places, trying to consort with the mainstream of the music industry. Like within 4 years or 5 years, that was what we were trying to do. And with hindsight, we did some work that way that we wouldn't have done any other way. But on the whole, it wasn't a particularly constructive experience, But it was part of ricocheting back and forth and just trying to learn things as you go, really.
Well, it was an interesting period, wasn't it? Because there was a time when the underground had a chance of being mainstream. And I guess you were kind of in that period when you saw post-Fall, post-Smiths, that the major labels were looking for sort of charismatic sort of oddball bands that somehow could be polished slightly, and would this make sense in pop? And it is quite interesting that they actually considered that as a good move.
It was a very, very different time. I mean, as you know, that kind of corporate thing doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
and in that form, it didn't exist for all that long. It was this strange period between big boom in record buying in the late 70s and the stock market getting involved in the 1983, 84 as part of the marketization of society in general and the privatizations and that. But in the music industry, that began the hideous consolidations, which have led to the situation that exists now. I heard a great interview yesterday with Stephen Mallender from the Cabs, and his understanding of it was absolutely crystal clear. Cabaret Voltaire signed to 2 different majors, and I wish we'd have had that kind of clarity of mind, but there's no point thinking about it now too much, really.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, maybe they were more savvy when they went in there. Maybe even in Sheffield in the 70s, into the early 80s, even though it's much more cut off than it is nowadays, you were still closer to that poisonous mainstream, and you could understand what it was. But I guess if you're coming in from Cork, you're a long way from it, aren't you? It was no pre-internet, so how would you know? You're going in quite blind to these things, aren't you?
Yeah, and what we were doing very early on was so kind of fragile and hard to pin down. I mean, we felt we had to consolidate,
Mm.
And like I say, I mean, I'm very pleased with some of the work we got done, but it was a bit of a convoluted way of going about things.
Well, there is no perfect career anyway. If you remained in the underground, you'd have still made records that you wish you hadn't made. Even if they weren't tainted by the
Quite
mainstream.
possibly, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
impossible to make 35 great albums in a row, isn't it? The Fall almost pulled it off.
almost, yeah.
Yeah,
But that was quite a convoluted path, also,
yeah.
in
Well,
its own, Mark's own way.
yeah. They tried to have the hit records as much as anybody else.
Oh yeah,
They,
yeah.
yeah. And they actually made some quite good ones in that process. So, I
Yeah.
mean, what was going on in Cork to create, you and Five Go Down to the Sea? It just seems such a idiosyncratic thing going on there, in a town. Like, you could not you'd expect one band, yeah, but two, and what I mean, was there actually any sort of space that this sort of stuff could exist in, or was it completely in isolation?
There was a space, but it didn't last very long. There was um, an old ballroom in the centre of town, just opposite the railway station, that had fallen on fairly hard times, and there was a couple, Elvira Butler and Andy Foster, who were running Ints for the university, and the ballroom approached them and said, "Do you want to take this from us for a night a week? Just to get some bodies in the place." It didn't have a drinks license or anything, and Elvira and Andy had quite an adventurous spirit, and as it turned out, booking policy. So they would bring acts in from the UK that nobody else would take a chance on. They got the only Irish date from the Fall, for example. And, U2 played there very often. First time I saw them was they were opening for XTC. And it was the XTC Mark 1 with Barry Andrews,
Wow.
Yeah. And you could see the most extraordinary things. The Only Ones came a couple of times, the Specials, the Beat. So they had all that going on, but they had a policy of having local bands as support, where possible. So that meant there was a place to play. And essentially, what the other thing that happened was a really small handful of people whom I was lucky enough to meet, but they've been doing stuff for a while before I met them. There was Finbar Donnelly, Ricky Deneen, and I guess Mick Lynch as well, and Donnelly and Ricky and the O'Connell brothers, who were the rhythm section for Nun Attax, which they began being called at around that time, had this thing going. They would practice in their bedrooms. They'd invite people to come and watch them practice in this tiny bedroom, up in Churchfield, up on the top of the city centre. And a bunch of the rest of us were kind of looking at this thinking, well, if they can do that. And then, they started doing the Arcadia ballroom, the downtown campus. And I mean, they were just amazing on stage. It was really, quite extraordinary. And they really had no precedent. They really did come out of almost nothing. You know, Donnelly was a T-Rex fanatic. Between them, they owned a bunch of kind of kinky, you know, Peru and records like that, but there was no kind of rock classicism whatsoever. Nobody was into the Small Faces or anything like, or the Kinks or anything like that. There was none of that sort of baggage. It was actual Year Zero, and it was coming out of some quite strange imagination. And bit by bit, the rest of us who knew them began kind of forming groups. And I met Sean O'Hagan, and him and me and Mick Lynch had a little band for a month or so, which was appalling. And fell apart. And then me and Sean and a few other people, Garrity left Nun Attax and joined us and that sort of thing. And that was the original 5-piece Micro Disney. And there was Mean Features, Urban Blitz. And then people started being able to go to Dublin, like the great metropolis. And again, some of us were lucky enough to make connections with people there who were able to help us on. Because then, like, the Arcadia in Cork had to stop because the local economy really flatlined. Ford's and Dunlop's factories closed, and unemployment was going through the roof, and people just weren't going out. And there was the Stardust ballroom fire in Dublin, which was appalling and caused fire safety regulations to be tightened up all over the country, and even places that weren't all that dangerous got hit by it, and it just got harder and harder to attract audiences and to remain open. So Cork then went into a kind of a hibernation period, which was part of its characteristics, really, throughout the 80s. There were these cycles that would happen, and Nun Attax fell apart. Donny and Ricky Smaley, they formed Five Good Under the Sea with Mick Stack and on second guitar and Unani Khan on cello. So that made it quite a strange lineup, because it wasn't lyrical cello. It was very, very much driving arco, arco to the max all the way. So, and then Mick went to London and formed Stump with Robb McCahey and Kev and Chris. And things began kind of spreading out of Cork, So that cycle came to some sort of fruition. And then a few years later, another one started with the Sultans and Frank and Walters. And that was much bigger, I guess, really, and sort of got noticed globally.
It's just amazing. It's a lot of groups come out of a small city, really. It's so. I mean, so for you, does that still inform you, that period? Is that still part of your sort of creative DNA, or do you feel very detached from that period of time and that geography as well?
Well, I feel a bit detached from it because, to be honest, the stuff I was writing myself then wasn't very good, and at least I don't think it was anyway. And that there was no way I could do what Donnelly did or what Mick Lynch did. I simply had no aptitude in those kinds of areas. You might as well ask me to, redesign a nuclear reactor, as come up with some of those things. I mean, the other day I was revisiting that Hiding from the Landlord album that came out of the Nun Attax and Five Good Under the Sea Beethoven stuff, to look for a track for something I was doing with Sean. And it completely stands up, and it is completely in and of itself. There's a universe entire there that was there from almost day one. I mean, Nun Attax could have been as big as Susie and the Banshees, I believe, but because it didn't work out, they threw that in the bin and did Five Good Under the Sea from the ground up, and that also emerged fully formed. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But to answer your question, I stand in awe of it, but I don't feel part of it.
Yeah. So do you think it's just interesting because you talk about the new album and, the way it's about identities. And I'm just trying to shift through the identities and find out what they are. So I just wondered if there was, and you're saying there isn't, and there probably isn't, there was some kind of lineage from that court period. Is that part of the swirl of identities? And it's, in a sense, is the album, are you trying to find your identity in a world of multi-layered identities, or is everybody now in this kind of internet period? Are we all just 20 different people at the same time?
Um, I don't. That's an important question, and I don't have an answer. Speaking for myself, I've had to inhabit a few identities just to get by. So that's definitely a thing. And when I was younger, because I couldn't face up to the bald facts of where I was and what I was doing, I would adopt identities, whether that was keeping afloat on alcohol and caffeine and uh, misbehavior,
Mm.
um, just to kind of create a mythology around yourself, so that you weren't just like on the bones of your arse, that you were actually, you had a platform that you had invented. I mean, that that can bite pretty hard, let me tell you. Um, but on the album, there are definitely. I mean, there is Cork stuff on there. There are landscapes in and around Cork that stay with me, that I inhabit in my mind every day. Um, but as for making sense of it, I've kind of given up. I've given up
Mm.
trying.
But that's okay. Yeah, that's okay as well, because art doesn't have to make sense of anything, does it? It can add to the confusion. That could be part of the hypnotic nature of it.
yeah. Well, but there is the worry for all of us that, as has already happened to people in, I don't want to sound really melodramatic about it, but it is a pretty clear example in Syria or Nagorno Karabakh. They've been forced to choose
Mm.
ways of life, if not identities. And it no longer seems so sure for those of us who've been fortunate that we will always be so fortunate. Certainly, if I told Richard Tice what I thought my identity is, he would say, "No, you're just a foreigner." you know. So, you know,
I always like the idea that punk was, I guess, what we sort of probably would accelerate our lives at one point. One of the key parts of punk was the ability to hold completely opposing points of view at the same time in your head, and that completely made sense. And I think that might even be in John Savage's book, but I really liked that idea that it didn't have to make any sense, and it could just be a big argument that's in your own head, and that could actually be a song on its own, can't it? And I was thinking about that when I was listening to your record and reading the notes up about it, and this idea of shape shifting identities, and there doesn't have to be one. You can be Cork, and you can be London, and you could be Shanghai if you wanted. and it and and I just wonder if those are the kind
yeah,
of themes you're playing with on the album. And also, just sorry, but the idea, even the album cover, which has got it's great piece of artwork, three faces at the same time. I mean, I'm probably just making this up as a punter, but that was like, to me, just split personality, three different personalities coming out the same head. So is all that going on, or am I just talking complete bollocks?
no, there is definitely something in it. I think the cover does kind of work on that basis, and that was one of the things I liked about it when Christabel came up with it. It also looks a bit like a kind of pagan idol, like something off a Martin Denny album cover, which was part of what we were kind of going for. Coaklan, bogus ethnicity thing. Um, but as for the John Savage thing, I'm not sure. I think reality does force you to nail your colours to the mast in some extent, certainly in terms of loyalty to the people you love. And so many things are open to misconstruction as well at the moment, that there were bits of ironic humor and things that I would attempt when I was younger that I would never attempt now, simply because someone's going to think potentially that you've got some prejudice. Everyone's become far too sensitive. But no, I think in my lifetime are prolonged by people saying one thing, meaning another, even on the island of Ireland.
When we talk about the flux of identity and finding identity and inside the music and the ideas of dealing with several different identities, or, is this a 21st century version? But you would talk about, maybe it's the other way around, that you have to nail your colours to a mast now.
Well, I'm hoping not, but I mean it does feel contended, and I think that John Savage idea of holding opposing thoughts and articulating them is fine for the finer detail of the creative process, for example. But if you apply it to politics, you just end up with Boris Johnson, and this is really what we've found, and we've witnessed so many conflicts in our lifetimes, and many of them have revolved around people saying one thing and doing another, or only saying part of what they thought, or claiming an identity but only really wanting part of it and wanting to throw the rest of it on escape, just expressing the identity as a way of differentiating themselves from something they really didn't like, that they felt threatened them. It is like walking on eggshells, and I think after the Second World War, people were a lot more unabashed about saying, no, I'm not going to walk on eggshells, shut up, because to be fair, I mean, that had to be done to fascism in order that the victory of the Second World War actually meant anything. Because I mean, I've for the last few years been reading up from various sources about 1945 and the period immediately after it, like Tony Judd's book, for example. Fascism did not go away overnight. I mean, it took a lot of intolerance, frankly, a lot of non-pluralistic thinking in order to finally get rid of it, And I think people, societies in Western Europe anyway, remained a bit emboldened by that for a long time and were quite intolerant. We don't feel able to be like that because we've seen what intolerance does. We've seen people excluded from society and people given subhuman standard of living or healthcare or education on those kinds of bases, and we were determined, many of us, not to do that again. So when John Savage says that, I think I get where he's coming from. It's from the kind of Tony Wilson and Malcolm McLaren, etc., neck of the woods, which for the creative process and the arts and all that sort of thing, great. But I suppose I don't really feel like I'm part of that, even though I drink from the same from the same trough in some ways. So I all I'm saying is I'm conflicted about it,
But in art, maybe it works, like you say. But in politics, you really have to decide which side of the wall you're on.
If a side that represents your true feelings actually presents itself, all political movements tend to be coalitions, and if you don't have some kind of united front, ultimately evil will triumph. But at the same time, if you spend too long burying the differences that exist within the united front and not really dealing with them, you end up with these internecine fights that can be just as bad as the thing that we regard as good versus evil. You see, I just don't know. It's those independence movements, political parties like take Sinn Féin in Ireland just after independence, straight away splits into two violently opposed movements, the pro and anti-treaty sides, which still, in large part, shapes politics in the Irish Republic. Except no, you've got the two halves of what Sinn Féin did then, forming a government together. While the modern day Sinn Féin is outside of that. But what am I saying? Many of those united fronts have fallen apart, especially in the years since Tony Blair. Since the Iraq War, it's hard to feel like you have a home on the left in Britain. For me, I mean, there are things that I believe.
Yeah. Do you think, in some ways, we almost have the luxury of choice, and it's actually become, in political terms, not great, and people aren't prepared to compromise, and people have got enough space to make their own minds up, which is great, but also we can't work together anymore. We've become a very I, me, mine, to quote the Beatles, kind of society.
Most definitely, and people have been, without wanting to go full Adam Curtis on it, individualism has become a much bigger thing and a much more strongly fought for thing than it was 30 years ago. And to some degree, we're paying the price for it. Truth has become a matter of individual perception, hasn't it? In a lot of ways.
In a way, did we start this with punk? Where it's all about being the individual. Or is it just trying to be the individual, but in a community as well? But the community bit just got lost on the way.
Yeah, that's it. I think a community of equals who are entitled to deviate while adhering to certain principles. That is still the ideal, but it's, things are so fragmented.
I'm going back to the record itself. I don't know if I'm sort of like reading too much into it, but would it fair to say it's got like sort of some almost pagan-y type themes on it? I mean, maybe because one of the titles got the word crow in it, which always makes me think of, the culture beneath Christianity, the old culture or whatever. And I love all those kind of, that kind of symbolism and those kind of ideas. And is that something you were playing with there, or is it just because it's just a great word to play within a song?
More the latter, actually. It was really just about embracing destructiveness and conflict and winding up the enemy by burying animals on their sacred ground and building houses for them that are going to fall down. But what you want is to get to the fight. You want to provoke a fight, but then the planet decides, well, screw the lot of you, I'm taking back this territory. They've got some fish that would like to live in water on that solid ground that you used to have. So that's mostly what that's about. But there is a kind of abstract belief. All right, the Crow Mother. The idea that something will save us, as long as we stay strong. So deliverance will emerge. History has shown, I'm afraid, that's not a particularly bankable way of thinking about the situation.
So there is a spiritual aspect to the record as well, or a questioning of spirituality.
I wouldn't think there is, to be honest. I still tend to poke fun at other people for it, and I don't think I have a great deal of it in me, And obviously, the situations you find yourself in as you get older are more and more hairy, and other people's mortality, you know, in a big way. And I think if it was going to be coming out of me by now, it probably would have, you know. But I don't condemn it in other people, you know. Like when I was younger, obviously everything was shaped by the contempt that we had for what a certain kind of Catholicism had done to Ireland. But that's only one. That isn't even the whole picture of the way of the religious faith people in Ireland had then, you know. Let alone what other faiths and belief systems that people have. I really believe in tolerance there, you know, not laughing at people for it, but it's just not for me, you know.
Yeah, well, I guess that's one thing about being a teenager or younger. You're allowed to have the blowtorch,
Yeah,
and then you kind
yeah,
of, you make a lot of noise, then you work out. You can have your own space anyway. So,
yeah,
so
yeah.
would
But I
you?
mean, yeah, outside the blowtorch is a good way of putting it.
So would you say that you're more suited to being a mature artist? You know, it's that all the way through your career, it's you always seem to have a wise old head, which maybe isn't what people want from a 23-year-old in mainstream terms. But all of a sudden, you made a record that actually makes complete sense for somebody of your age or whatever. Which I'm assuming is the same age as me. I'm nearly 60, so we're on the same vintage, I
Yeah,
guess, give or
yeah.
take a year. And it's very difficult. It's difficult to make a record when you're older that actually doesn't sound like you're trying to be a teenager, but it seems to suit you. Do you think that's something? Are you aware of that at all, or is it just you just make a record, whatever?
I think the things I was doing in the like the 2000s, the first decade there, were probably a bit more of the older style than this record is in its totality. Um, I think it is important to have a way into your own skin. You know, like someone I really admire is Robert Forster. He has found a pretty unlikely way of acclimatizing um, to to being his age, but it completely works.
Mm.
And I think we each just have to find our own way. You know, we can't all be Leonard Cohen. You know, he completely inhabited the body and the mind of a man in his 60s, 70s. Um, it's easy to it's easy to fasten onto that because it was so excellent. Um, but we each have to find our own. I think it's just as challenging as being a younger misfit in a way. Being a young person who fits in is probably the most comfortable thing of all. You know, we all want to be Billy Idol if we can. You know, uh, he's our great Valerio, if you like. Um, but it's the challenge of originality. Just really, you know, it's all it never really goes away. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. Yeah.
So, I mean, on the record, you work with a lot of people you worked with over the years, and you seem to play around with some of the different styles. I mean, they're not wildly different, but the different sort of nuances, textures, and flavors of your music over the years as well. And is that an embrace of what you've done in the past, or is it a way of just trying to find the road for the next bit, or again, is it just that's just what you like doing?
Um, it's a bit of all those things. But I think really it is throwing a lot of things up in the air to see what seems like the best thing to do next. I think there is a stronger train of that. And certainly when I got to Chrome Mother, which is one of the last things I wrote, I thought, right, this kind of crystallizes a whole bunch of things I've been doing. Because I'd been in this Bertolt Brecht show in Dublin, in late 2019, and I'd done a bit of research work, well, both for my own singing, but also for the poetry that people were asked to read during it. So I was quite immersed in the Brecht life and obviously the music, the great music of Weill and Dessau and Eisler. And so I think Crow Mother crystallized just a whole lot of things, like the noisy guitar and the kind of the clanky percussion and the chord progression. I mean, I can't really quite put it into words, but that's what I'm hearing as my next thing, and that was part of the intention. But I wanted to also make a record that felt like a bit of a get together, because I felt I needed to get together with my identity as a singer. You know, that's because that's kind of what I am, really, more than anything else. And I thought the best way to do that was to get a bunch of people around with me who I'd either worked with before or recently come across and fancy doing more stuff with, you know. So that's why it's quite a broad range of people playing on it. And yeah, the Dylan album Love and Theft, you know, when he made that, he said he wanted to make a record that was like a best of with no hits on it. No, he had the benefit of having had hits that he wasn't going to put on the record. I obviously do not have such delusions, but you know, I think that's one of his strongest records, and I thought, yeah, you know, have some of that, really, you know.
I mean, what are the plans? I mean, it's hard to make plans in this period, but do you have some plans of what you could try and do next?
Well, the main thing is to get out and play the songs to people whenever there's an opportunity to do it in a way that can actually hang together, you know. And if that means doing it in a very small group setting, then fine. I'm up for that. I've done the like of it before, but the more people I got on stage with me, the happier I'm going to be. So that's very uncertain. I've never before done a record that hadn't had some opportunity to ricochet off an audience. And I think that is the most valuable learning you can do, really, with a bunch of songs. You know, it's how I came up. I don't, you know, I can't sequester myself for years and necessarily develop as well as if people had been reacting to the stuff. So that's the thing. But I've made another album with in a duo with Jackknife Lee, who's a producer, originally comes from Dublin. We know each other from way back from the Vox magazine days when we were all apprenticed essentially to Dave Clifford. And we've done this kind of a sort of an electronic record. It's quite bracing. There isn't really anything like it on my album. So it's a pleasant change away, and we're going to be doing new stuff that leads onwards from that. But my own new stuff has started forming up a bit as well. So, you know, but the single most important thing is to play the songs to people and see what that does to my perceptions, really.